is there a way that the United States could bypass a recession or bypass this issue? Or maybe kick the can further down the road. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Look, I guess we could bypass recession and go straight to depression. I guess that's one way of doing it. But look, we may not have a recession. If they print enough money and create enough inflation, the GDP could keep going up. As long as they underreport the inflation. If inflation is 10% and they claim it's, 5%, they can turn a 3% declining GDP into a 2% expansion, right? So if they're not honest about inflation, they can always make the GDP go up. And so who knows? But the problem is that higher GDP isn't going to mean anything to the people who actually live in the economy, because it's really measuring inflation and not economic growth.
And this is where now I think somebody listening to this or watching this sees the concern. Inflation is still an issue. The prices of things are still rising. Most people's incomes are not growing fast enough to keep up with inflation. Dealing with the inflation problem is painful. That is going to hurt the economy. It can hurt me. It can hurt everybody. But if I don't deal with the inflation problem, that's not, everything is okay, right? It's just...
Yeah, you can't ignore that, hey, but for the tumor in your brain, you're fine, right? You can't ignore that problem. And it's not just an inflation problem. It's a government problem, because the government creates the inflation. Inflation is how the government is paying for all of its spending. So the reason that goods and services cost so much is because the government spends so much. That's how people are paying for all these programs. So when a President Biden says, hey, we have this new stimulus plan that we're passing, whether it was the Inflation Reduction Act or, the CHIPS Act or whatever they've passed, to stimulate the economy, and they say, don't worry, it's not going to cost you anything. Or, oh, we're only going to tax the millionaires and the billionaires. No, they tax everybody with inflation, especially the middle class and the poor. Because the government has two ways of paying for the programs. One is they could do it honestly and raise your taxes and then spend the money. But that pisses off the people who have to pay the higher taxes. So the other way is they just print money, right? Or, they could borrow the money too. I guess that's the third way, but they ultimately have to pay that money back. In the short run, it would push up rates. But when they create money and spend that, they're not taking your money. You still have all your money. The problem is they're taking the purchasing power away from your money. They're taking that purchasing power, creating new money, and giving it to somebody who didn't earn it, who didn't do anything productive. They just collected a government check. And now they can take that check to the store. And they could buy the same things that you're buying, even though you worked and they didn't. So all this new buying just bids up prices. And so the government takes your purchasing power instead of your money. So instead of having less money, my money just buys less. So at the end of the day, I'm in the same place. I buy fewer things because of government's need to finance its increased spending. So that's what we have. We have a government problem. And so to solve this government problem, i.e. inflation, we need to cut government spending. We need a smaller government so it doesn't have to create so much inflation to pay the bills.
How do you teach somebody that? And what I mean by that is, if we go back to the financial crisis, when Occupy Wall Street was happening, and I know you were very vocal about everything going on then, people didn't like the idea of bailing out certain banks and institutions. But then you come 2020 and stimulus checks are being handed out. Now it's give me more, give me bigger checks, because the money is coming in my pocket, not theirs.
I think, look, I was opposed to both the bailouts, both the bank bailouts and the COVID bailouts, right? I think one of the reasons that the public was opposed to the bailouts is because it was the banks that were getting bailed out, right? The bankers, the rich bankers. And so they didn't like that. And they were right. And in fact, a lot of the people getting the bailouts were part of the problem. Now, the government was the real source of the problem, but the banks went along for the ride. it takes two to tango. I always talked about how, George Bush said Wall Street got drunk and just blamed it all on a drunk Wall Street. And I said, yeah, I agree. Wall Street was drunk, but don't forget who the bartender was, right? The Federal Reserve was serving up the drink. So, you can't excuse the Fed. You can't just say Wall Street was drunk and ignore who liquored them up, right? So the public didn't necessarily get that. That's, when I went to Zuccotti Park and I did my I'm the 1%, a lot of people have seen that video. I was trying to let the people know that their anger was misplaced, that yes, they had a right to be angry, but instead of protesting on Wall Street, they should have been in Washington, D.C., protesting the Fed, protesting at Congress or the White House. They were the problem. Wall Street just took the bailouts. The problem was the government never should have made those bailouts available. Of course, if it wasn't for the government, there would have been no reason to bail anybody out because it's the government that created this predicament. But when it came around to COVID bailouts, that was for Main Street too. All kinds of small businesses got those COVID PPP checks and those forgivable loans that weren't really loans because you didn't have to pay them back. So it was a feeding frenzy of fraud. People got all kinds of money from the government. So there wasn't as much pushback because a lot of other people were getting in on the action. And in fact, the banks were not even allowed to get that kind of money. They were excluded. I had a bank at the time and, it's been shut down. But my bank, we did really bad. We got a hit during COVID. We had other things going on, but we didn't get any government money. We didn't, even though I had a big loss of revenue because all my customers were small businesses and they stopped working. So our transaction revenue went down. The Fed went down to zero. So we lost our interest income. So we actually lost money. I mean, my asset management company did great during COVID because our assets went up, our fees went up. So we did really well. Ironically, we could have applied for money from the PPP. I didn't do it because I didn't, I just, didn't want to lie like so many other people did to get money I really didn't need because my business went up. But at my bank, my business actually went way down, but I wasn't allowed to qualify. I wasn't allowed to apply because the banks were specifically excluded from the program. So, and that might have been because, the people didn't like the banks getting bailed out, so, they didn't mind everybody else. But a lot of big hedge funds took bailout money, a lot of, brokerage firms, a lot of people who were actually making more money than they were before COVID were somehow able to get all these forgivable loans, which, they didn't repay. Some people repaid them. But I think that's the main reason that you didn't get the protests. But I protested them all. I protested the Wall Street bailouts. I protested the COVID. I protested the PPP program. All of these programs made the economic problems worse, not better.
And the PPP program, I think, was named the largest financial fraud in American history with the amount of fraud that happened through that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I said that was going to happen the day it was announced. I said, you got to be kidding me. Yeah, and there were actually some people that considered, they had some motions raised, hey, maybe we should have some checks and balances here to make sure people aren't lying. And they're like, no, we can't do that. That's heartless. We can't make people prove that they, what they're saying. We just have to give out the money to everybody who asks for it. No questions asked. And the dumbest thing they did was if you lost your job, you got like triple, 2 to 3 times what you got when you had a job. So we created an incentive for people to leave their jobs because they earned more money staying at home watching television and shopping on Amazon than schlepping over to work every day. And actually somebody proposed an amendment that says that your unemployment must cap out at what you used to earn. Like, meaning you can't make more on unemployment than you would have earned. But even that wasn't that great because if I had a choice between earning, $700, working 40 hours a week and commuting back and forth to a crappy job, or I can just get the same $700 and not have to go to work at all, just stay at home and not even get out of my pajamas, right? I'm going to take, the money without having to do the work. But they wanted to at least say, look, we're not going to let people get more money staying home than if they had a job. And they shot that down. They said, no, we can't do that. That's too mean. So, I mean, it was the stupidest fiscal monetary policy combination in history. What they did we haven't even felt all the effects yet.
And going off of what you were saying, I think that kind of worries people about what might be coming in the future. Like you, I didn't take any PPP money, even though we were not using our office and not paying a lot of expenses like we didn't have. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to watch the entire conversation, all you got to do is click that button right over there. And for those of you who want to stay up to date on the top finance and business news, you can join Market Briefs, my free financial newsletter, by clicking that button below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.